Your money is losing value right now. Not tomorrow. Not after the next election. Right now, while you are watching this. Every hour you hold $1, a pound, a euro. It buys a little less than it did when you woke up this morning. That is not a theory. That is not an opinion. The Bureau of Labor Statistics confirms it. The Federal Reserve confirms it. The dollar has lost more than 96% of its purchasing power since 1913. 96%. If you had hidden $100 under your mattress the year the Federal Reserve was created, today it would buy what $3.50 bought back then. The number printed on the bill has not changed. The value behind it has been quietly, methodically, deliberately destroyed. Here is the question no one asks. How does a government convince an entire civilization to accept money that is worth less every single year, and keep accepting it for decades, for generations, for centuries, without a revolution? The answer is not complicated, but it is old. Much older than you think. There is a number. A number. It appears in the Roman historical record in 31 AD. When you hear it, it will not seem real. We will come back to it. In 211 BC, Rome introduced a silver coin called the denarius, 4.5 grams of nearly pure silver, 95% fineness. Roman legionary earned 1 denarius per day, paid for a meal, a night's lodging, a measure of grain. It was money that held its promise. For 250 years, it largely kept that promise. Then a government needed money it did not have. And in 64 AD, an emperor named Nero did something that has been repeated in different currencies and different centuries by virtually every government that has ever faced a budget crisis. He called in the coins, and he reduced the silver content. He minted more coins from the same amount of metal. More coins, same goods. Not prices went up. He did not announce it. No government ever does. That is the mechanism. That is the scam. And it has been running, in one form or another, for 2,000 years. The coin in your pocket is the direct descendant of that decision. The inflation you feel at the grocery store, at the gas pump, in your rent payment, it is the same arithmetic. Different metal, different century, same result. The money architect. Let us look at the numbers. What do you think the Roman government told the people when prices started rising? Leave your answer below. To understand what happened to Roman money, you need to understand what Roman money was. The denarius was not an abstract promise. It was not backed by government confidence. It was not fiat. Was the thing itself. Guy silver, weighed, assayed, stamped with the emperor's face, and put into circulation with a fixed intrinsic value. Roman soldier, a Roman farmer, a Roman shopkeeper, they all understood intuitively what their money was worth, because it was made of something real. Under Augustus, who ruled from 27 BC to 14 AD, the denarius was returned to near perfect purity. Approximately 98% silver, 4 grams in weight. This was deliberate. Augustus understood that stable money was political power. Not by a currency that held its value told the people their government was trustworthy. His successors, Tiberius and Claudius, maintained those standards. For a generation after Augustus, the denarius held. But Rome had problems that silver could not indefinitely solve. The empire was enormous. By the 1st century AD, it stretched from Britain to Egypt, from Spain to Syria. That empire required armies, hundreds of thousands of soldiers on permanent payroll. It required roads, aqueducts, grain shipments, a massive administrative apparatus. The Roman historian Suetonius records that Augustus left a treasury surplus when he died. His successors found ways to spend it. Nero came to power in 54 AD. Out was 20 years old. He inherited a functional empire and an expensive court. Great fire of Rome in 64 AD destroyed 10 of the city's 14 districts. Nero's reconstruction program cost money. Rome did not have insufficient quantity. Faced a calculation that would become familiar to the finance ministers of the next 2,000 years. They could raise taxes. This was unpopular. What invited revolt? They could borrow. This deferred the problem and created a larger one. Or they could call in the coins, reduce their silver content, and mint more of them. The face value remained the same. The metal value did not. No new taxes. No public debt. Just quietly less silver per coin. Nero chose option 3. In 64 AD, the silver content of the denarius dropped from approximately 98% to 90%. Also reduced the weight slightly. Most Romans did not notice immediately. Merchants who handled thousands of coins at once noticed. They adjusted their prices accordingly. This is how debasement works. It is a tax that does not announce itself. Not government spends more without collecting more. The extra spending power comes from somewhere. It comes from the purchasing power of every coin already in circulation. From every Roman who had saved. Or every soldier whose salary was now worth fractionally less. By technology. The government had discovered a machine for moving wealth from citizens to the state without the citizens knowing they were being charged. That machine has never been turned off. Here is the part nobody tells you. Nero's debasement was not unusual. It was not the act of a uniquely corrupt emperor. It was the first domino in a sequence that every emperor after him would continue. Because the logic was irresistible. Once you have diluted the coin and discovered that the economy absorbed the shock, the next crisis is easier to solve the same way. Trajan ruled from 98 to 117 AD, pushed the Roman Empire to its greatest geographic extent. From Mesopotamia to Scotland, wars cost money. Silver content under Trajan slipped to approximately 85%. Not still substantial. Still a real silver coin. But the direction was established. Marcus Aurelius, remembered as the philosopher-emperor, the wisest ruler Rome ever produced, reduced the silver content further. By the time he died in 180 AD, the denarius was at around 75% silver. Marcus Aurelius had fought the Antonine Plague and the Marcomannic Wars simultaneously. Both cost money. Philosophy does not pay legionaries. Pay attention to this number. Septimius Severus came to power in 193 AD and did something more cynical than outright debasement. Invented a new coin, Antoninianus, officially worth 2 denarii, but containing only 1.5 times the silver of a single denarius. He did not reduce the existing coin. He created a new one that was dishonest by design. Coin that declared itself to be worth 2 units while containing the metal value of 1.5. Every time an Antoninianus changed hands, the person receiving it was defrauded by exactly 25% of the declared value, and they had no legal recourse. The coin was the law. His son Caracalla, who ruled from 211 to 217 AD, raised the annual pay of a Roman legionary to 750 denarii. It sounded generous. The coin, by that point, contained 50% silver. The pay raise in real silver was modest. Caracalla understood this perfectly. Out he was buying loyalty with debased metal. By 235 AD, Rome entered what historians call the crisis of the 3rd century. Over 50 years, more than 50 emperors and usurpers seized power. Every one of them needed money. Every one of them minted coins. The denarius, as a concept, fragmented. Different mints, different emperors, different compositions. The Antoninianus continued its decline. 60% silver, then 40%, then 20, then 10, then 5. By 268 AD, under Emperor Claudius II, the Antoninianus contained approximately 2% silver. It was, for all practical purposes, a bronze coin with a thin silver wash that rubbed off in your hand. 230 years after Nero's first cut, the Roman money supply had lost 98% of its intrinsic value. Here is what that looks like in human terms. Roman soldier, whose grandfather served under Marcus Aurelius, earned the same nominal number of denarii as his grandfather. The coins looked the same. They had the same names. Emperor's face was still on them. But in terms of real silver, real purchasing power, they were worth approximately 1/40th of what his grandfather had held. The number on the coin stayed the same. The value behind it had been stolen. And this is where the story changes, because the Roman government did not admit that it had created inflation. It did what governments always do when the cost of living rises beyond what ordinary people can manage. Not blamed someone else. By the late 3rd century, prices across the Roman Empire had escalated to a degree that disrupted daily commerce. Measure of wheat in Roman Egypt that sold for 6 drachmas in the 1st century AD cost 200 drachmas by 276 AD. That is not gradual inflation. That is the mathematical consequence of reducing the money supply. Intrinsic value to near zero. Or coins chasing the same amount of grain. The grain did not change. The coins did. But the official explanation did not say this. The official explanation blamed merchants, speculators, not hoarders, not profiteers. The language was almost identical to what you hear today when prices spike. In 301 AD, the Emperor Diocletian issued the Edictum de Pratius Rerum Venalium, the edict on maximum prices. It set legal price ceilings on more than 1,400 goods, services, and wages across the entire Roman Empire. Wheat, wine, beef, a haircut, a day's work for a sewer cleaner, the fee for a teacher of rhetoric. Every price and every wage fixed by imperial decree. The penalty for exceeding the maximum price was death, not a fine. Death. And not only for the seller. If you paid more than the legal price as a buyer, the same penalty applied. Diocletian had the edict carved into stone slabs and erected in public spaces throughout the empire. 42 fragments of those stone slabs have been found by archaeologists. They are the physical record of a government that had debased its currency for 2 centuries, and then told its citizens The problem was merchant greed. Now we reach the number I mentioned at the start, one that should have been impossible. In Diocletian's own records, cross-referencing what a sextarius of ordinary wine cost in the 1st century AD with the prices recorded in his 301 AD edict, the same volume of the same wine now cost 63 times more in nominal denarii. Not 6,300% inflation, not NEF in 300 years. Produced entirely by the government's decision to reduce the silver content of its own coins from 95% to approximately 5%. The edict failed within 4 years. It was not enforced in the Western Empire at all. In the Eastern Empire, the result was immediate and catastrophic. Merchants stopped selling. Goods vanished from markets. Black markets appeared. The Roman historian Lactantius, writing during this period, recorded that men were afraid to expose anything for sale, and the scarcity became far worse than before. By 305 AD, when Diocletian abdicated, the edict was largely ignored. By 307 AD, the price controls were abandoned entirely. Not by technology. The prices were finally stabilized only when the government stopped diluting the money supply. The lesson from 301 AD is not complicated. You cannot fix a currency problem with a price control. The price is a signal. The signal is responding to a real change in the value of money. Not suppressing the signal does not change the underlying reality. It only makes the reality harder to see, until the moment it becomes impossible to ignore. Diocletian understood this. His private correspondence with advisors shows he was not naive about the cause of inflation. He knew what the debasement had done. He chose the political explanation over the accurate one. He named the merchants as the enemy, because naming the currency as the enemy would have required naming every emperor for 200 years as the author of the crisis. Explanations are too honest to be politically survivable. The Roman Empire fell in 476 AD. The denarius died long before that. But the mechanism did not die. The mechanism transferred. You need to understand what happened in 1971. On August 15th of that year, President Richard Nixon appeared on national television and announced that the United States would cease converting dollars to gold. The Bretton Woods system, which had fixed the dollar to gold at $35 per ounce since 1944, was over. The dollar became in that moment a pure fiat currency, gnawed by nothing, backed by except the authority of the government that printed it. This was not called debasement. It was called monetary policy. But here is what is actually happening. Under the gold standard, the US government could not mint money it did not have. Gold reserves constrained the supply. The moment the gold window closed, that constraint disappeared. Not technology. The government could expand the money supply whenever political or economic pressure required it. More dollars. Not same goods. Not prices go up. 1913 to 1971. 58 years, with the gold standard operating as a partial brake on money creation. The dollar lost approximately 50% of its purchasing power. From 971 to today, 55 years with no gold anchor at all, the dollar has lost more than 80% of what it had remaining. The acceleration is not a coincidence. The mechanism is identical to what Nero began in 64 AD. The metals are different. The timeline is different. The logic is the same. In 2020 and 2021, the United States expanded its M2 money supply by approximately 40% in 24 months. That is the fastest expansion of the dollar supply in modern American history. The federal government and the Federal Reserve created, in 2 years, more new dollars than had been created in the previous several decades combined. By June 2022, the Consumer Price Index reached 9.1% annual inflation, the highest in 40 years. Not what did the government say. It said the problem was greed, corporate greed, price gouging, not supply chains. The language was not identical to Diocletian's edict, but the structure was the same. Find a villain that is not the government. Name the merchants. Protect the political explanation from the accurate one. Here is what most people miss. The United States is not unique in this. It is simply the most recent, most globally significant example of a pattern that repeats wherever governments control the money supply and face expenditure pressure greater than tax revenues. Weimar Germany in 1923, Hungary in 1946, Zimbabwe in 2008, Venezuela after 2016. For instance, follows the same steps. Expand the money supply to cover spending. Prices rise. Blame the market. Attempt price controls. Controls fail. Reality reasserts. The difference between Rome and these modern examples is speed. Rome took 300 years to reduce the denarius from 95% silver to 5%. Weimar Germany went from a functioning currency to wheelbarrows of notes buying a loaf of bread in under 4 years. Zimbabwe printed trillion-dollar notes within a decade. The technology has improved. The underlying human decision, spend more than you have by debasing the currency, has not changed at all. Your dollar is not Nero's denarius, but the distance between them is shorter than most people are comfortable admitting. This is where it gets genuinely uncomfortable. Because if you accept that governments consistently debase their currencies to cover spending they cannot fund through taxation, and the historical record is unambiguous that they do, then you have to ask the next question. Not who benefits. The answer is not a secret. It is documented in every serious economic analysis of inflation, from Adam Smith to Milton Friedman. Inflation is a wealth transfer. It moves purchasing power from those who hold money to those who can spend it before prices adjust. The government spends first. It receives full purchasing power. By the time those new dollars or those debased denarii reach the ordinary citizen, in wages, in commerce, in savings, prices have already adjusted upward. Not vice. The citizen receives money that is worth less than the government received when it created it. This is called the Cantillon effect, named after the 18th century economist Richard Cantillon, who identified the mechanism 3 centuries ago. It describes exactly what you experience when you notice that asset prices, stocks, real estate, commodities, often rise with inflation while wages lag. Those closest to the source of money creation capture the purchasing power before it dissipates. Those furthest from it, wage earners, savers, pensioners, absorb the loss. In Rome, the emperor and his immediate court spent debased coins at full face value before the market adjusted. The legionary on the frontier received his pay after the coins had already been circulating. The farmer selling grain had already repriced it. The soldier's salary was always chasing prices that had moved ahead of him. You know this feeling. You have lived it. Now consider what it means for savings. A Roman who frisked 500 denarii in 64 AD and held them for 30 years found that by the time of Septimius Severus in the 190s, his coins contained roughly 60% of the silver they had held when he earned them. He had not spent a single coin. He had done everything right. He had been prudent, patient, responsible. Quietly, invisibly, 1/3 of his life savings had been transferred to the state through the mechanism of debasement. He did not receive a notice. He did not sign a form. There was no political debate about it. It simply happened. The Federal Reserve has an official inflation target of 2% per year. 2% sounds modest. Compounded annually over 30 years, the span of a working career, 2% annual inflation reduces the purchasing power of a dollar by approximately 45%. A worker who saves diligently over a career, holds dollars, and retires at 65 will find that their savings have lost nearly half their real value even under the official target rate. Not through bad investment, not through irresponsibility, simply through holding the government's currency in the government's economy. The Roman government did not need your vote to take your silver. The modern government does not need your consent to reduce the value of your savings. Both required only the control of the money supply. That is the deeper truth, and it is the reason why, in every era where this mechanism operates, the people who understand it protect themselves with hard assets, land, gold, productive capital, while those who trust the currency find out, eventually, what trust costs. You are not a Roman citizen in the 1st century AD, but the arithmetic does not care about the century. Right now, your savings account is paying you somewhere between 0 and 5% annual interest, depending on where you hold it. Official inflation in the United States averaged approximately 4% annually between 2021 and 2024. If your savings rate does not exceed the inflation rate, your savings are shrinking in real terms every year. The number in your account goes up. The purchasing power behind that number goes down. This is not a crisis. It is a feature. It is designed this way. Consider what you are holding when you hold dollars. You are holding a promise made by a government with $23 trillion in outstanding debt and annual interest payments exceeding $1 trillion. A government that has not balanced its budget since 2001. A government that, by the mathematics of accompanying debt, cannot repay that obligation without either dramatically reducing spending, dramatically increasing taxes, or continuing to expand the money supply and accept the inflation that follows. The third option is the historical default. It is always the third option, not because governments are uniquely corrupt, though some are, but because the political incentives make the other two options extraordinarily difficult. Raising taxes is unpopular. Cutting spending is unpopular. Inflating the currency is invisible enough, gradual enough, distributed enough across an entire economy that the political cost is manageable, until it is not. This is what Nero understood in 64 AD. This is what Nixon understood in 1971. This is what Diocletian understood and then publicly denied in 301 AD. The mechanism is not secret. The mechanism is not new. The mechanism is the oldest fiscal tool in the history of organized government. Every working person who is in cash is is a system that has been systematically, historically documented, transferring their purchasing power to the state and to those closest to the creation of new money. You have been paying this tax your entire life. You were never told it was a tax. You were told it was the natural behavior of prices in a growing economy. It is not. The denarius weighed 4.5 grams of silver in 211 BC. By 268 AD, the silver content was 2%. By 268 AD, prices had risen 63 times. That is the math. That is the endpoint. Not every currency reaches that endpoint at the same speed. But no fiat currency in recorded history has held its value indefinitely. Not one. Not so. A number from 301 AD. Wine that cost a fraction of a denarius in the 1st century AD cost 63 times more in Diocletian's era. 6,300% inflation, produced by a single, sustained government decision to reduce the silver content of its own coins from 95% to 5% across 3 centuries. Diocletian's response was to carve new maximum prices into stone and execute anyone who charged more. The goods disappeared, not prices continued. Reality won. The Roman Empire did not fall because of barbarian invasions. It fell because it could not pay its soldiers, feed its citizens, or maintain its infrastructure when the money it had been spending for centuries stopped being worth anything. The debasement did not cause the fall alone, but it hollowed the empire out from inside over 300 years, till the structure was too brittle to survive the next external shock. Sound familiar? The dollar has lost 96% of its purchasing power since 1913. Not 95%. Not theoretical. Measured, documented, confirmed by the Bureau of Labor Statistics. The paper in your wallet is not the same thing your grandparents held. The name is the same. The value is not. This is not a reason for panic. Panic is not a strategy. Understanding is a strategy. The people who understood what Nero was doing in 64 AD, the merchants who adjusted their prices, the wealthy families who converted denarii into land and productive assets. They survived the collapse of the currency. People who kept their savings in coins found out what that decision cost them when Claudius II was on the throne. History does not repeat. But if you do not understand it, it will crush you all the same. By technology. The question is not whether governments will continue to expand the money supply. Not by they will. The question is where you stand in relation to the mechanism when they do. Not subscribe. Because the next video goes somewhere. This one only hinted at.